Oh, yeah, that's right, Bo Daddy. You know what time it is?
I do know what time it is.
Oh, what time is it?
It's time to nerd out with your geek out.
Yeah, I uploaded
I
our
didn't know if
song.
I didn't know if you were gonna close that line or if I needed to.
Well, look, we're just warming up. We're just warming up. Just warming up. But thank you all for listening or watching or whatever it is you're doing. Personally, I love all the shout outs from long-time homebrewed peeps. They're like, oh, so glad the TNT is back.
Yeah?
Yeah.
Oh,
Yeah.
it's good to hear.
Well, if they were like, I can't stand that the TNT is back, I'd be like, well, I don't care. But if they like it and I like it, then I'm like, I appreciate those voices.
It's it's a positive confirmation bias.
Yeah. Yeah. I was like, oh, yeah. So, fun things. We got new logo and stuff that's in the works.
I saw that.
Yeah. That's what I'm
It's
talking
pretty
about.
sweet. It's pretty sweet.
And so that's exciting. And I think we're gonna have two different versions, and then we'll like see what people think. Like the one with the Moses thing, part in the Red Sea.
That's a fun one.
And then us as theological MMA wrestlers type thing.
Yeah. What I really like, and the artist did an amazing job in the Moses one. I'm in at my winter weight, and then in the wrestling one, I'm at my summer weight.
Oh, look, I just noticed that I was the same height as you. That's the main feature that stuck out. I
didn't notice that.
I was like, somebody put me on a stool because otherwise we wouldn't have had our both heads in. You would have had yours and I'd have been. They're like, who's down there? It's Tripp.
You would have just had your what do you call your hairstyle? It's not a mop. What is it?
I call it it regretfully started thinning in lockdown, and so I just embrace what it feels like doing and try to walk around with confidence as if it was on purpose. I was told at this past week, I spoke at the Persuade conference, which is like a process preaching conference, and then Tom and I did God After Deconstruction event about the new book.
Yeah.
And I had a number of people say they're like, oh, it's kind of like you got that Malcolm Gladwell, Einstein. I'm smart and just play with my hair, and like I couldn't be bothered to tame it because my mind is untamed with creativity. And I was like, or I was hanging out with Tim Burnett until 2 a.m, and I'm just glad I got in time for my chat.
Tim Burnett. You know what, Tripp? I just realized I knew something was different here, and I didn't know if it was because we were using the restream. And I was like, something's off with my camera angle, and I just realized what it is. So I'm gonna make a quick adjustment.
Ooh, all right. Well, I'm gonna turn on some music. Oh, Bo's making a quick adjustment to his camera, and
there we go.
There we go.
There we go.
Well, and this is you, and now you feel better.
Yeah, no, okay. I definitely feel better. that under chin camera angle was not
only certain body types appreciate that. And but I want all the people that only listen, which is probably most people, know that Bo's really, really leveling up his liturgical eyewear. I know that we discussed this a couple episodes ago. And I just want you to know he's got green eyeglasses on. It's normal time.
We're back in ordinary time.
And I just feel like we're just waiting. Like, what is it? Somebody needs to come sponsor liturgical eyewear. We have like the pioneer of it sitting here ready to be your optical influencer for liturgical spaces.
Man, you really latched on to that idea. It's funny. It's like many things religious. It started practically and then meaning got added to it, right? Mm-hmm. So it started out because I had this one pair of glasses. They are red. I forgot them when I flew back east for my dad's funeral. So I had to go to Walgreens and buy some readers. But I was noticing like my eyes were feeling a little taxed. I get home, I look up, why are these red glasses so amazing? Turns out they have like a blue filter in them, and my eyes relax and it feels so much better. And that they come in other colors. And so we we decided to color coordinate with the liturgical seasons, stole glasses combo. And I got to tell you, my congregation is really digging it.
Oh,
At
that's what I'm talking about.
first, the theory was that it was I selected my color based on what mood I was going for. Because I guess when I wear the red ones, I'm a little zestier. And,
Oh,
but anyway, no, when I clued them in, that was actually coordinated with the colors of the liturgical calendar. So now it's sort of a thing, and I'm digging it.
yeah. What happens if every time you went out, you go into the pulpit, right, with your red ones on? What if, oh, the Bo Daddy's got his red glasses on. Hold
People
your
know.
horses.
People know.
Yeah, they know junk's about to go down.
Tripp, how is the God After Deconstruction going? Are you having fun with it?
I mean, like God's all put back together, like Humpty Dumpty.
Fully reconstructed?
Yeah. It was fun. I really enjoyed, this is the second time we've done an event, and then like different theologians in the area show up and stuff.
Oh, really? Okay.
Like the first one in February we did at Drew, John Tatominal and Catherine Keller were a part of it.
I heard that. I listened to that.
I got Catherine Keller sent me and Tom an email about how much she loved the book. She said, I just read the whole thing in one sitting.
Oh, really?
And I can't wait to get to use it in the classroom. And I was like, oh,
man, Catherine,
man, you should have sent us that to put it on the back of the book.
We could have used that when it was blurb season.
Yeah. So that's all going good. It was fun because the Sunday I got to preach at St. Andrew United Methodist, which is the host for Beer Camp. And,
yeah.
It was a lot of fun. It's going to be a great venue and such. I went out after it. We went to this tap room, right? That has like 100 different local beers, and they're like, you got to try these different ones and talk about which ones you want to come to Beer Camp, you know?
Oh.
And just to clarify, not everyone drinks at Beer Camp, but those of us that do. And
we're not literalists.
No.
About many things.
No, it can be a metaphor.
It's a metaphor. Yeah.
But so, you know, there's like a reception-y, not like a, you know, like a structured hang, and there's it's like the transition between the preaching conference and God After Deconstruction. So there's probably like 40 clergy or so all hanging out at this place. And there are these two guys. They're like, Tripp, I heard you and Bo talking that there's like no chance that anyone has to beat Bo and a Chug-Off at Beer Camp. And they're like, I think I'm pretty good. I'm like,
oh, all
right. Let's see. No, they actually had to use their throat, Bo. They had to gulp. I was like, there's no chance, you know. And I'm like, go ask Tim. So they go up to Tim, you know, Tim Burnett, who's been present for your spiritual gift, and he's like, no, you don't understand. Is like he drinks at the pace of gravity. And they're like, oh, I got to practice. So I just want you to know, I told him, I was like, I have no chance. I don't mind participating, you know, and this place had Pliny on tap, which, you know,
that's special.
Yeah. Anyway, so I'm excited about that, Bill.
Yeah, it's gonna be good. It's funny. I'm not feeling pressure per se, but I hope that this thing doesn't grow too much, because, you know, it'll be interesting. It seems like it's going to take on a life of its own. I got a text from somebody I haven't heard from in ages about it, and I was like, first of all, I didn't even know this person listened to the show, and secondly, to hear from them on this one thing, I'm like, should I get nervous and rein this back in a little bit? And
you got to lean into it, you know.
Lean into it.
It's like improv. Yes, and
Okay. Hey, can I tell you my deconstruction story?
Yeah.
Because your 9/11 story, if people haven't heard on the Tom Ord, was that on the main channel? It was on.
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah.
Oh,
Okay.
which before you say it, everyone should know, once we get our new logos and junk, we'll update the feed, and then this podcast will only be on TNT. So you should
Okay.
go subscribe to Theology Nerd Throwdown,
Yeah. Yeah.
and, but we'll
It's gonna be
remind you once it'll be a few weeks, but
okay. It's gonna be its own stream.
yeah, yeah. I mean,
Okay.
it already is its own stream. It's just it'll be fully revived,
Right. Yeah.
resurrected of sorts.
I
Well,
am
or
subscribed to both.
resuscitated, right? Because it's not resurrection, because it
That's
isn't
right.
an eschatological event of the revealing of God, the world's future in God. But
Right.
nonetheless, Bo's gonna take us back to 2004.
All right. Your 9/11 story was really interesting, and it made me think of my 9/11 story. I was actually at our annual conference I lived in upstate New York at the time, and we were at an annual conference, and it really took me back to make me think about what, that whole event and just what life was like in 2001 and where I was in my spiritual development and all that stuff. So, what I really wanted to tell you is actually has more to do with listening to the oral history, and some of the stuff that it has brought out in me, and how they came together for me. Because I think you'll have some immediate feedback to riff off of as I tell you this story. So feel free to chime in as I tell you this.
Thank you for giving me permission, Bo. I
Like
wanna
just to
what
name,
I just heard was enthusiastic consent
yes,
to
yeah, yeah,
intervene in said
yeah.
story.
I have no interest in a monologue. I want to be in dialogue with you.
All right.
So, um, in 2004, I lived in upstate New York, Saratoga Springs, New York, and I was an evangelical church planter. So that ties in with the emerge thing. So I was a practitioner, I was evangelical, and I had been a youth pastor. So when you all are talking through the emerged thing, I was every single one of the things that marked sort of those early days
That Venn
of
diagram was
yeah, yeah.
intense.
Yeah, yeah. So I'd been a youth pastor, I became a senior pastor, church planter, practitioner. In my evangelical denomination, you did not have to have a master's degree. You just have to have like a Bible degree. And so I lived in a town in Saratoga that had a really like almost an Ivy League school called Skidmore. And it
Great
was
theater department.
yeah, yeah. So it was really nice. And they had a little Christian group, probably an intervarsity style group. I would go and speak there from time to time and interacted with their leaders. And, so I was very involved in that. I would speak at college groups or youth summer camps. And so I had been to the Billy Graham School of Evangelism. It was a Ravi Zacharias style apologetics, how to defend the faith and make a compelling evangelistic presentation so that people became Christians, and also to defend Christianity against secularism and right. And I was really well practiced at this. I loved being an apologist.
Mhm.
But in the early 2000s, I noticed a pretty radical change in our culture. Both the young people who had been raised in our church and the young people who started coming to our church, who were converts, they were different. They were concerned about different things. They asked different questions. And one of the reasons that it sort of annoyed me is because they were no longer asking the questions I was so well practiced at answering. And they weren't as concerned like about evolution or like the things that I was really felt like I had a solid explanation of. And specifically Bible stuff, they weren't as well versed in the Bible. So they didn't ask a lot of Bible questions. They were asking like bigger questions about like other faith traditions and stuff, but also just cultural questions. A lot of them came from divorce, home, and you know, as latchkey kids, and there was just a whole different sort of ethos, I want to call it, like a posture, but it was very elusive to me. It was I could feel something changing, but I couldn't quite put my finger on. I didn't know what postmodern was at the time. And I'll never forget, as this sort of sense of, and music was changing with, and everything. And even the way films, like the way we
That was
interact.
like Shout to the Lord style, wasn't that? That was.
Yeah.
Do you
Yeah.
remember that worship collection, that first one that we always
Yeah.
had like late night things, and they played that
Yeah.
song over and over again?
Yeah. I
Yeah,
do.
yeah.
Was it called like Wow? Like
Wow.
this is worship?
Oh, maybe. It was
Something like
something
that.
like that. It was something like that.
By the way, I was cleaning out a closet here last week and I found a stack of CDs, and that famous green cover, that CD was in there. I thought it was hilarious.
Well, I'm
Now
glad
this
you.
is worship, something like that.
Yeah.
So I'm driving down the road one day. We had the coolest downtown in Saratoga. Saratoga is best known for its racetrack. So in the summer in New York, they shut down, I think it's Aqueduct. They shut down, and everybody, all the horse racing moves up, thoroughbred horse racing moves up to Saratoga. Every August, you can watch it on ABC, the Travers sweepstakes. But the town grows from at the time, it was like 30,000 regular, and it grows to over 100,000 when the track is there. And the town is just buzzing. The downtown is just a fantastic, beautiful atmosphere. We had Saturday night church because we had started the church plant in the mall, but then they tore down the mall to build like a Home Depot, sort of generica. And our office building was on the other side of downtown, and we were renting a Baptist church. They had a Christian school. We rented their gym that was now unused, and we had Saturday night church. And it was great because young people could come and then go out afterwards and talk. And it was an amazing atmosphere. So I had to buzz over to the office. This is on a Saturday night, Saturday afternoon, and I'm driving over to the church building, and I see a guy. He has a shirt, and on the back of his shirt, it says, Jesus is a CUNT.
Oh,
I had never seen a shirt like that before, just so blatantly, mean-spirited and irreligious or something. I mean,
yeah.
it was like,
If it was British, it was lower on the curse word rankings,
oh, it is? Oh,
Yeah,
for us.
Yeah, I discovered it with children in public schools in Scotland. Little Haven, after starting preschool, just like F and C, and
No
like
way.
everyone says it all the time, and I'm like, no, can we pick any other?
Yeah, let's use the other bad words.
Yeah, I was like, when you go visit your family,
Yeah.
we're gonna need to switch this up.
There's only a couple words you have to spell in
Yeah,
American cursing. So when I saw this shirt, it bothered me so much, but it was emblematic of this change I was sensing. So I pull over. So I'm about a block ahead of this guy. And I get out of my car. And because I was an evangelist, I was used to just walking up to people and starting conversation. I wasn't nervous about that. And with my size, I don't have to, worry very much.
You got the big body privilege.
Yeah, that's true. And so I'm walking back to this guy, and the front of his shirt is even worse. There's two characters on this shirt. There's a large-breasted nun in a low-cut habit, and she is being penetrated from behind by a ghoulish demon. It was like the worst shirt I've ever seen. Okay. So I walk up to this guy.
That's problematic on a number of levels.
Oh, it's awful.
And in the theological is the last, right? Like you're just like, Jesus may be something, but you know what he isn't into? Rape.
Yeah, well, it may have been consensual. I don't know what was going on there. But so walk up to this guy, and And I said, "Hey, what's your shirt about?" I thought he was going to say it was a band. It sort of looked like a band.
You literally told me to, buddy.
No.
This is what happens.
Okay.
Look, Tripp, stop interrupting. You say Tripp, just interrupt
I
me.
did.
Look, I agree
Okay.
with Louise. I'm trying to let you tell the story.
Okay. So I said, "What's your shirt about?" And he says, "Jesus is a C word." And I said, "Yeah, I know, but what's it mean? What's it from?" And he just says it again. And we didn't get anywhere. And then he wanted to end the conversation. It was very uncomfortable and awkward. And he walks away. And I am left just going, what the hell's going on around here? Like, that's the worst shirt I've ever seen. And also, if it was a band like Bad Religion or something, he would tell me, right? But no, he just kept saying this thing that hurt my ears over and over. So I get back in my car. I drive to church that night. And I just have this very uneasy sense like culture is changing. There's something going on with young people. I don't know what it is. I'm being less effective than I was just like 3 years ago because this generation, there's definitely something where they're more, whether you call it irreligious or grungier or we would call it like nihilistic. There was something intangible I couldn't put my finger on. All right, so I'm going to fast forward a little bit. I'm then having coffee with the woman who is the head of the InterVarsity group at Skidmore. And I'm talking to her about a couple things. And she says, and she had just graduated from college. And so I graduated in 97. And so she had graduated, I think, in like 2003. And so she knew a whole bunch of stuff that I was new, right? Because things were changing pretty rapidly. And she asked me if I knew who N.T. Wright was. And I didn't. And she said he has a thing called narrative theology that I think you would really like. So I go on the new internet and I find a PDF of N.T. Wright's, like, not defense of the Bible, but how to read the Bible, what the Bible is. It was one of those powerful things I've ever read. And I was fascinated. So then I start looking stuff up. I found Len Sweet and Brian McLaren because I was really into the Bible. This is the important part of the story that I want to make sure comes through. The unique part for me is that so much of my transformation, whether it was deconstructing or becoming open and affirming, for me happened through the Bible, with the Bible. And for so many of my peers, both then and since then, it has come in spite of the Bible or to spite the Bible, And so I get really into this N.T. Wright thing. I'm reading McLaren, who's a little edgy for me, but I was intrigued by it, and I also liked his that he wrote fiction, a new kind of Christianity, new kind of Christian, and so we're reading all that sort of stuff, and I'm listening to Len Sweet's Napkin Scribbles, little podcast that I love, and I get a call from my district superintendent of my evangelical denomination. And he says, "Hey, it's come to our attention that you're have gotten into theological exploration." And I say, "Yeah, I'm curious about these things, and definitely something's happening, and I want to continue to be effective reaching out to young people and college students." And he said, "Well, there's a little bit of concern, and so we would like this." So N.T. Wright, Len Sweet, and Brian McLaren, we would like this to be the outer edge of your theological exploration.
They just said it directly?
Yeah.
Oh.
So not exactly a slap on the wrist. Sometimes I call it a slap on the wrist, but it wasn't really. I didn't get punished or anything, but I was
a redirecting invitation.
A shot across the bow, if you will. And something inside of me, I'm not a rebellious person. I'm not one of those people who's like, if you tell me I'm not allowed to do something, I'm going to do it to spite you. Like, I'm actually as the oldest son, I have a built-in sort of loyalty, and I have the denominational logo tattooed on my arm from Bible college. Like, I'm a company man, right? I'm into this. I have a tie that has the logo on it. I have a coffee cup that has the logo on it. Literally, I had shirts that had like golf shirts that had the logo. I'm a company guy. So to get reprimanded was strange, especially when I was attempting to be upgrade my ministerial effectiveness. It was very bizarre. So I went for a walk and I ended up, do you remember Borders bookstores?
Oh yeah.
Brick and mortar bookstores.
Yeah, they've since died. Endangered species.
A horrible death. So I end up at a Barnes & Noble bookstore. And because we were a pretty secular town, Saratoga, the religion section was very small. In fact, it was right next to the philosophy section. They sort of shared shelf space. And I was looking at just like the spirituality religion section and started looking over at the philosophy section. And I noticed a book called The Truth About the Truth. And as an apologist, that title really grabbed me. And I started flip through the book, and it was the first time I had seen the name Derrida, but I didn't even know how to pronounce it. So I said Derrida. I didn't know, right? And so I bought the book. I still have this book, by the way. I have multiple copies now because it was so important to my development. But I bought this book, and it felt a little bit scandalous, like naughty. They had just warned me. And here I am. And so I buy this book, and I start reading it. And it's unlike anything I've ever read. And I didn't even know what epistemology was, and I'm introduced to postmodernism and to deconstruction and to all these things I had never encountered, right? Identity politics. And I just, it was like the first time you take in a substance and you feel that immediate rush of blood, to your face. It was exhilarating. Or like the first time you swear, it's like putting a 9-volt battery on your tongue, it's electric. And something happened where I realized I'm going to go in a very different direction. I can feel it. And so I joined a philosophy book club, and I started like engaging with this new thought. And what ended up happening is by 2007, I realized I need more education. I need to think about this stuff, and I need to ask some questions that I can't ask in this local church context. So I found a seminary that was asking these questions out in Portland. So I resigned from my church. I had been at for 11 years. It started as a church plant. We ended up building our own building. We had Saturday night church and Sunday morning church because all our young people started getting married and then having kids. And so then we switched to Sunday morning. It was going really well. But I was haunted by what ended up becoming deconstruction. And so I moved across the country and I went to Portland, Oregon to go to seminary because that's where Len Sweet was associated with. And they had these little cards that had all of these split screens on them about like orthodoxy and praxis and all sorts of cool. They were very artistic, and it was intriguing to me. And I flew out there. I listened to a Len Sweet thing. I met some people, and I decided I wanted to move across the country. So that's how that started. Through the process, and I'm almost done. Through the process of going to seminary, I realized that there's more than one way to read the Bible. And so it was actually through exploring, and I didn't know the word hermeneutics back then, that through exploring different ways of reading the Bible, that I actually came to be whatever it was that when you emerge, whatever that thing was that I emerged into, was actually through my peers showing me different ways of interpreting scriptures that I thought were written in stone and crystal clear, and they problematized it for me, complicated it, and it was such a gift. And listening to both your conversation with Tom Ord about God after deconstruction and listening to the Emerged oral history has been bringing back all of these memories of how just exciting of a time that was, where all of these things were super consequential, right? And they mattered so much. And on 3 different occasions, one in New York, one in I was in Olympia, Washington, and then one time down in LA when I moved down there in 2010. It cost me or almost cost me a job. So like trying to make a living as a deconstructed or deconstructing minister, like people didn't want you to be in the pulpit if you were saying this kind of stuff. And it was, I mean, it was an electric time. And then when I joined forces with you, I had been doing a little podcast, an Everyday Theology. I gave that up, joined Homebrewed, and the contentious atmosphere of when I would post a blog, and the comments would start rolling in, and the tweets, the mean-spirited, critical tweets, both from the right and the left, and like all of these memories have been coming back about how incredibly animated and just energized that entire conversation was. And I miss it. I really miss it because things have changed so much. And now, politics has become sort of omnipresent.
Mhm.
And whether it's masks or whatever, everything's politicized. And it's not the same because theologically, it was so rich and so consequential and weighty that things really mattered.
Yeah.
And now you struggle. Like I say the craziest things from the pulpit now, like things I could never have gotten away with 10 years ago. And I'll post them. I'll clip them
Yeah.
and post them. And they'll get like 4 likes.
Yawn. Yeah, yeah, you're like, "Oh, Bob, there's just Bo doing his thing."
It's unbelievable how even your conversations with Rachel Held Evans, how edgy and how, tentative she was. You could feel the trepidation. And 10 years later, it's like commonplace.
Yeah.
You're like, that was an incredible 10-year window, man.
Oh, yeah. And thinking of that transition going, like, it emerges because of your questions around, like, an identity as an apologist, right?
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah.
that goes out. So here, I had two different ideas that
Okay.
popped into mind. I want you to tell me what you think. One, you talked about how, your kind of movement of change, openness, faith transition, deconstruction happened through engagement with scripture, right?
Yeah.
It was through the Bible, and that more and more people do it kind of to spite the Bible, right? Like,
Yeah.
oh yeah. And and having done a few events talking about it that are towards general audiences and getting the kind of messages you get in a class or people reading the book. I I what if that difference has to do with the like this centering orientation for your faith?
Mm.
And I think some people's orienting center is what they know, right? And so
Mm.
when the questions come up around what they know, it either is going to be rejected or expanded, and that's how they're processing it. Others, the orientation of their faith is about what they do, moral formation, moral
Mm.
boundaries, all whatever way that comes out, right?
Mm.
And so deconstruction there plays out different. And you can think of, since 2016 and on, the number of evangelicals who remained, right, as what you're allowed to think, got narrower and narrower over time, right?
Yeah.
Where now they don't even want you to read N.T. Wright or Brian McLaren. Um, but it's the moral thing that sends them out. 2016 into 2020. Oh, we'll build walls, put kids in cages, MAGA, all that kind of stuff. And then I think for others, there's an experiential center of their faith. When I was, or you could call it the giftedness or passivity or whatever.
Yeah.
And then, so for them, oftentimes it's, like church harm, abuse, problem of evil, like where their own life experience, is the cutoff point. Right.
Yeah.
And so the shifting, the over time, the places where American religion began deconstructing, shifted. So initially, I think a lot of it was intellectual, right?
Mm.
Coming out of, the kind of anti-intellectualism, fundamentalist, like boundary drawing lines of evangelicalism. But then it gets to these kind of moral or experiential questions. You could see the experiential ones showing up earlier, right? Where evangelicals draw boundaries with the
Yeah.
charismatic movement or the Pentecostal one, right?
Right.
Precisely because
Right.
certain encounters of the Spirit question the authority of, biblical interpretation or
Yeah.
whatever. But I think, I feel like the way people narrate their stories and kind of reading them,
Yeah.
to me, grouping not like the issue or the question, but, what was the orientation, like the centering orientation of your faith,
Mm.
and then how did that one have to grow? And you and I tend to be nerdy ones.
Yeah.
Others, it could be like moral, like in actions, and
Yeah.
others, it's that experiential center.
Mm. Whoa, that I like that. It really resonates with me because as Methodists, we have John Wesley we look
Mhm.
to. And in the 70s, Albert Outler came up with this thing called the Wesleyan quadrilateral. And so it has scriptures always first, prima scriptura, tradition, reason, experience. And so the only difference between it and the Anglican version that Wesley inherited is the addition of experience. So one of the games that I like to play whenever I'm introducing somebody to the Wesleyan quad is to put them up and then to take one away and say, what if we only had this remaining three-legged table? What would our faith look like? So when you take away scripture and you only have tradition, reason, and experience, right? And it really gets people talking. Well, when you take away experience and you only have scripture, tradition, and reason, that's a pretty dead version of religion, right? That's where people get into like rich, the ritual, right? But you can even experience the ritual. And so experience is just a really vital part of this. And I think that for me, because I was a practitioner as a church planter, theology was always in support of the practice, the doing, and so I wasn't primarily concerned about theological matters. The primary thing was reaching new people, right? The evangelistic impulse. So what I ended up becoming, where theology is my main thing, and in practice is the application of that theological exploration. But back then, it was the doing was the important thing, and the theology was just the fuel that gave it the fire.
Mhm. Well, yeah, I just, like, I'd been thinking about these differences, and,
Yeah.
see, now, like, in 2 weeks, you'll text me with cool names for all 3 of them, and then I'll just use that, because you're
Okay.
better, coming up with names.
That's
Um,
that's what I do.
I'm just like, wait till Bo tells it to me later, and I'll be like, "Oh." Um, so the other thing I thought of, like, that disposition in your story of the apologist is a kinda ratcheting effect that happen, and obviously, like, where you live in the country and your all those things that happen, the intensity's been different, right? So,
Mhm.
when I moved from even an educated part of North Carolina to Los Angeles,
Yeah.
junk was different there than,
Ah.
and that kind of thing. But I wonder if you think these four things are part of the ratcheting effect, and if there are others that come to mind. And I think, like, at first, they're like, what does apologetics look like after the fragilization of beliefs? That even if you have them, even if they're logical or whatever, there's a sense that um, that they are inherently fragile, and if you act like they're not, then you're sus, right? So, like, you're going to hold the truth lightly, even if
Yeah.
you hold it passionately, and I think that, like, because belief was fragilized, just the posture of certainty from the apologist became problematic. So the act
Yeah.
of doing apologetics would look different. That's the first one.
Tripp, that is incredibly important. Just the way you said it, because ultimately, what I have sort of noted is that those who go through the process of deconstruction and ultimately retain or maintain a faith practice or an allegiance or a belonging, a religious identity, membership in a church, whatever it is, or even staying in ministry, that those who changed what they believe, but not how they believe it, that rigidity doesn't hold up over time, because the when you change the box or the shape of the box or even the content of it and you keep running into things, eventually it does break down, right? That, and I learned this from Brian McLaren, is that part of the transition is not just to believe different things than you used to, but to hold them differently or believe them differently. And so you do become more malleable, more like mushy and soft or pliable or whatever word you want to use, because you can't keep running into the same structures, right? And doorways and bottlenecks over and over again without breaking apart. So you have to get a little squishy and, like, it's required to move through those spaces, because otherwise, whether it's the gatekeepers or the orthodoxies of the institutional doctrinal gates, whatever it is, you can't make it through if you stay as rigid. So the actual structure of your belief, your faith, if you grew up being like a passionate evangelist, apologist, and then what you believe changes, the way you present that also has to change. Because I know lots of people who went from being, say, anti-gay or anti-drinking or anti-something, and then they became, say, open and affirming, or they had liberty, however you want to say that. But they were just as passionate about their new position
Oh
as they
yeah.
had been about their old position. And I'm not going to say that none of them have survived, but I can't think of one that's still in the faith.
Yeah. Well, um, or you could just think of take. I know a number of people that restarted their blog 4 times and changed the name to now represent, like, their true final position, and they
Okay.
were just as certain each time. Or
Yeah.
take someone like Mark Driscoll, right? It starts,
Yep.
"Oh, I'm an emerging church, you get
Yeah.
kicked out." Now he's like, testosterone, overzealous Calvinist, and then his, like, church is like, "No basket," and then he's like, "Well, now I found the Holy Ghost, and I'm a charismatic Christian nationalist," and then he got
Yeah.
in trouble calling out the Jezebel spirit at a men's conference. Um, but like, this sense of, like, the mode of holding it changes.
Yeah.
Okay, here's the second one, Bo. Or you were about to say something. Did me saying Jezebel spirit tempt you?
It did. No, it threw me off. No.
You've probably heard that before. I had to go Google and realize that this is a thing
Oh yeah.
certain peeps do, is they
Yeah.
work around the Jezebel spirit. And
Yeah. It's a pretty ugly accusation.
also not really clear that they read the text to understand,
No,
like,
no.
what was problematic about Jezebel had little to do with her, um, you know.
Yeah. No, the thing I was going to say is about coded language.
Uh-huh.
So one of the things that, especially if you like people like Derrida or French continental philosophers, they really language gets a little a little more flexible. And one of the things that I love about tracking language is sometimes when you emerge or you deconstruct or whatever this thing is, right, that we're talking about, you can start to be more playful with language, right? This is why Pete Rollins is just, a masterful in his whimsical sort of takes on things. The reason he can be so playful is that there's something in language. And this is where those who are very rigid about whether it's interpreting the Bible or their doctrinal beliefs, where their rigidity allows us to be a little like we can rope and dope, right? Because we don't just have to stand there and just in a pugilistic way, we don't just stand there and just pow. And then you punch me, then I punch you, and then you punch me, right? So you can dip and dive and dance a little bit, is because you realize that language is not exacting, it's expressive. So one of the things I do is sometimes when people ask me questions, sort of seeing if I measure up or if I still have, if I'm a real Christian, is you can be playful with your language. And so one of my favorite ones is I'll say, how would I know? Because in English, that has come to mean I don't know. Right? It's a migrating signifier, and it's now used a different way. But what I like to do is take things that have migrated and bring them back to their original position. And so I'll say, how would I know? But I'm genuinely asking, what's informing this? How would I know?
Uh-huh.
So like people will ask me about
people
the
appreciate your clarity.
So, but people think that I'm being elusive or, tricky or that I'm dodging the question, but I'm not. I'm asking the original question. How would I know? So people ask me about the afterlife. So I'll just say to them, how would I know? But I'm genuinely asking, what's informing our opinion on this? Right?
Yeah.
So I just wanted to say that we do have an advantage over those who are more rigid in their belief structure, because we get to be a little playful and dance with the language a little bit and, tease out the remainders that don't have a place anymore. And it's more fun on this side. It really is more fun.
Well, so 2 and 3 are related, but I think they're separate. Like number 2 is like the legitimacy crisis of almost any institution, right? Institutions are having legitimacy crises just in general, economics, political, religious. But the church one, I think, starts the moment like you can see the trends from the rise of the religious right and the way people respond and engage it all the way through, right, over time, cover up from child abuse in the 90s and things, we're going to attack Bill Clinton but not Donald Trump, we're going to be the cheerleaders for war in Afghanistan and Iraq. Like the legitimacy crisis of the church plays out in a whole number of ways. And that's the same time you see this growth, where the sociology of Sunday changes, and the cultural dominance of Christianity shifts in different parts of the country at different times, but where the demands for sports, the end of blue laws and work, there's a host of different things, but where the sociology of Sunday changes both in what's on as options for people and the non-religious but cultural perks of participating in religious traditions. So like as there's a legitimacy crisis for institutions and religion in particular, you also have the kind of parachurches of capitalism emerging as like ways of connecting to community, occupying your time, fitting yourself for heaven, and by that we mean retirement plans in the future. Both of those things have this giant shift where the apologist is no longer the representative of reason on behalf of the culture dominant structure of values. and that like those two things kind of collectively change the disposition, right? Where you get this feeling, this is what I, in the story you told of like, there's this shirt and there's this problem and it's obviously wrong and I'm uncomfortable with it, but it's coming from somewhere. And what do I do about it? And, like, but like there, if you went back a generation, there was more authority culturally to stand on, to ask that you're asking the question from. Now he just gets to lambast you, wear it, walk off, and say it over and over again.
This is Tripp. I am having so much fun in this conversation. I genuinely don't care if this ever airs.
Oh, it's airing right now.
Okay, I'm just saying.
There's 160 people watching it.
I am loving. Oh, that's nice. I am loving the gift of processing with a longtime friend who knows me and my story, and like this engagement is a gift. I just want to say, like, my heart is alive and reliving some of these memories, because when I'm listening to the show, I have my earbuds in and I'm walking around alone in this giant facility, and I'm having all these experiences and memories of people that have not known me and who wouldn't know what I'm talking about, because as mainliners,
they're mainline Protestants.
That's not their experience, right? Like, I love these people, but they've always been liberal. You know what I mean? And so,
do you remember when it was edgy to read into, right?
Like, do you remember how edgy that was? They're like, we've been there since the 70s. Mainliners have a really dismissive attitude sometimes. So I just want to say that I'm really enjoying this. Let me tell you about something I learned. I was in a conversation with a professional musician. Okay. He was a part of my philosophy book group in Saratoga. I went out to coffee with him one time. He had no religious background at all. And he was as fascinated with my religious orientation as I was intrigued by his complete absence of it. Like, we couldn't have been more different in some ways. And he liked listening to me because he had no frame of reference for my stories. But I loved listening to him because I'd never had access to somebody so irreligious, So one day he's telling me about recording, and but he doesn't know that he's actually telling me about epistemology. He doesn't know that. He's telling me that the room, as a musician, the room you record in, you can hear it in between notes. You hear the room. And I'm like, what the hell are you talking about? It doesn't make any sense. And so he said he's trying to help me understand sampling rates. So he gives me this analogy. Now, keep in mind, he's telling me about recording music, but he doesn't know that this becomes, in the 10 years since he tells me this is like 2006, I think, in the 10 years after, that it becomes one of the most important framing metaphors in my life.
And because he doesn't hang out with clergy very often, he doesn't know that at any moment you could be texting yourself or putting a note down and you're like, whoa, sermon material.
Yeah. So this is what he tells me. He says, imagine that you lived in a hole in the ground, a cave.
Like a hobbit.
Yes. And you came up for air or to get water or whatever. You poked your head up every 12 hours. How would you think the world worked? And I said, well, you'd think sometimes it's dark and sometimes it's light, but it's on a fairly consistent pattern, right? It's predictable. He said, what if you came up every 6 hours for air? I said, well, you'd have a more accurate sample, right? Because of da-da-da-da-da. And he says, all right, what if you only came up every 24 hours? I said, I guess it would depend if you came up in the day or if you came up in the night, you'd have a very different picture of how the world worked. He said, what if you came up for air every 33 hours? And like, so my brain started to bend. And usually, by the way, when I tell this story, I go like this.
Oh, the
Because
truth about truth.
he was, and we were sitting in a coffee shop, but I might as well have been smoking the ganja, because my mind and consciousness was expanding
The
as he's
Jehovah
trying.
Wanna.
Jehovah Wanna,
Yeah,
baby.
that's what Karl Barth had. What was that?
So
The cartoon Jesse made? Oh, it was Bonhoeffer.
I
He was
Bonhoeffer,
smoking the
the
yeah.
gateway
The
drug
cost of discipleship
is the
is
gateway
a
drug.
gateway drug.
Yeah. So this stupid thing where he's trying to describe to me why the room you record in matters, and like why, I think I was asking him why they put up like the foam curvy paneling, in recording studios, and why you don't record in like a gymnasium or like that kind of thing, right? And but this became so important to me because I realized that people's experience of the world can vary so greatly. And often it has to do with how often they check in, how often they take a look. And for some people, the world looks very stable and predictable and reliable, right? And predictable in a way that you can explain it and be fairly accurate. And for other people, the world is chaotic and unreliable and right, not explainable. And for other people, it's that sometimes it's this way and sometimes it's this way, and you have to right. And I realized that like people's experience of the world, depending on the rate at which you are sampling, quote unquote, can vary so greatly. But what it also exposes is what you're not hearing, what you're not seeing. So you have to both account for and attend to both what is seen and unseen, experienced and unexperienced, because that sampling rate will give you like how, whether it's how your faith sounds or how your experience of being human, right? That the reason that it can take on such vastly different tones and emphases and other things is because of this sort of question of the sample rate. And it transformed the way I thought about ministry, um, philosophy, politics, sociology. And so I just wanted to throw that story out to you because I was hoping that you would like it as much as I did.
Oh, yeah, yeah. No, and I think it definitely, it gets at, what I was hearing because, like, if part of faith, right, is understanding the world and yourself before God, um, and you've lived in a world where culture itself has instilled a rhythm, right, for legitimating and such, and then our sample rates all become different over time, right? The changing sociology of Sunday. You get in this giant legitimacy crisis of like what counts as light and dark when your
Mhm.
head's popping out, and everyone's on these different rates. So if you just go and go, well, let me
Yeah.
tell you how the world is. If you operate by this very specific schedule, blah, 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 all
Yeah.
the way with liturgically themed and colored glasses, right? Like, then this is how it looks. And
Yeah.
it just, then what is received as natural, like how the
Yeah.
world
Yes.
is revealed as hermeneutical, and then what's the difference between um, life forms, right? And I think that's where you see that shift in a postmodern space to
Mm.
aesthetic judgment over like final truth type judgment or ultimate good type judgment.
Yeah.
What becomes compelling,
Yeah.
and I think you see this on the evangelical to Episcopalian highway, is aesthetics and the aesthetical power of a particular story or aesthetical power of a rhythm and ritual. But that no, I could tell you want to know what would be fun if you were doing that live. You have
Yeah.
a cartoon, right? So like you got your little hobbit who lives in a hole in the ground, um, and you got you like the door of Bilbo's house, right? Since we're now at 1 hour, I can talk about this
Okay.
because we can't talk about the Lakers, Lord of the Rings
The
till an hour in.
gloves are off.
So you got the hole in the ground, right? And you got little Bilbo, in there. And then around it, you got like the 3 on each side of like where the sun is, right? And then like you have the head go out how many times because it's the clock,
Yeah.
right? And so then you have that on there, and as you go, like, so what happens if you just do it twice a day? Now his head comes out twice. Now what if you did it every blah blah blah? Now what if you did it every 33 hours? And it starts scattering, and you see all these different things, and then you're like, well, what if? Then you start changing the weather, then you start changing the climate, start
Yeah.
changing the seasons. And so then if
Right.
you walk up to them, right, as an apologist, and you're like, well, let me tell you what you're going to find when you go out in the world, right? You don't find an adventure.
Yeah.
You find that you're being told, like, here's what's there, right? And
Yeah.
and you're just saying, no, it's postmodern. You gotta get a little bit tookish. You gotta get a little tookish. Got to go on an adventure. And
That's really good. Let me tell
it'd
you
be a
2
picture
things.
book. It'd be like a picture book.
I love this. And now with AI, I'll bet you I could actually get this thing animated.
Yeah.
Let me tell you 2 things about sample rate that really stood out to me in that window that I was talking to you about, the 2004 window. We used to do a lot of premarital counseling because I was the only pastor in my town that would do weddings for people who didn't come to church. Every other pastor in town, there was more than 50 of us at the pastor's prayer breakfast. Every other pastor in town would only do weddings for people in their congregation.
Is this
Or
because you read N.T. Wright? They were like, this is how backsliding begins.
no, it was because I was an evangelist. I wanted to be the one that said, you will need a third strand in your marriage, a cord of 3 strands, right? You got to have God's presence in between you. So I wanted to be the one that helped them bring God into their relationship. Dude, I'm telling you, this evangelist thing has been, over the course of my life, like one of the primary drivers. So the reason it's so funny is because I've become, oh, somebody liked my sample rate. Sorry. Good. All right. So here's 2 illustrations of it. The frequency with which people started coming to premarital counseling who lived together went from being, I remember the first time I ever met somebody who lived together and then wanted to get married. And so we made them, back in those days, they had to move out. One of them had to move out and live with friends like 6 or 8 weeks before the wedding. Because I don't know what we were trying to do, but it made sense back then.
Yeah. Well, they at least had to tell you they did.
Yeah. But I remember the first time that a couple had lived together and then wanted to get married. And then over a 4-year window, Tripp became so prominent that I never, in those final years, I don't know that I ever did a wedding where the couple didn't live together first. So you talk about a sample rate. It went from once, ever in my experience, to every single person in a 4-year window. And so I just would ask, why is everyone living together now? What the hell's going on? Right? That was so bizarre to me.
And
But
then
that's
you
a
said
sample.
Reagan era tax policy is emptying out the middle class and forcing elongated adolescence, unsustainable family systems, and that's not what you said.
So, but as far as a sample rate went, I had to account for what was going on. The other sample rate that you might find super interesting is because I was part of a missionary denomination. We would send missionaries, called the Great Commission Fund. We would send missionaries to another place to learn a language and plant a church or whatever they were going to do, start an orphanage, drill wells, whatever. They would be gone for 4 or 5 years, and then they would have a home year. And on that home year, they would go to a different church every week. We would host them. They would tell us about their life and ministry and their work in their country. And then they would go to a different church, okay? But they were only home. The sample rate was every 5 years.
Yeah.
but I got to spend time with a missionary every year. Okay. So to hear their reflections of being outside of the US for 4 years, they would come back to hear their reflections of how things were changing. So their sample rate was once every 5 years, but my sample rate was every year. The consistency of what those various missionaries were telling me, no matter if they had been in Indonesia or in Africa or South America, their return to the United States, they would reflect to me how they were watching things with young Christians or young people change. Their sample rate once every 5 years, my sample rate once a year. But as I chained these together, they helped me access and be able to account for how radically it was changing, and to know that it wasn't just me. They were reporting back to me, like 5 years ago when I was sent, it wasn't this way. I
Mhm.
come back 5 years later and this is assumed.
Yeah. No, I mean, that's similar to, like, what we talked about a few weeks ago, just, like, coming back to North Carolina, right? Like, I moved to Los Angeles in 2008, was here was here,
Yeah,
9 months or so before I
yeah.
was in Scotland, and, um, so and then came back, and I'm like, like, what in the world? Someone dialed up the intensity of the cray cray up in North Carolina, and like people that like I have a lot of shared values with in history and stuff. They didn't experience it with the kind of like vertigo intensity that I did going
Mhm.
from like, I mean, if you are teaching and ministering, even if you're in Los Angeles, you're still spending a lot of time with people of faith. They just don't have the same issues culturally that you do in the South. So when you come back, you're like, oh, this is weird. And then like the racism was dialed up after Obama. More people bought guns right in between. And then I go to Scotland for a while, lockdown and Trump's presidency happens, come back, and junk got even more intense and
Yeah,
more change just like in the 3 years in Scotland. I feel like,
yeah,
you're like, well, I was gone 12 years, right? Before I came back to North Carolina. No, no, no. It's like just going faster. And I'm like, what roller coaster are we on? But like that sample rate thing totally
yeah,
hits. I think the speed of change in different places, right? Like not everyone's sun spins at the same rate,
right.
and then when everyone has their own light
Yeah,
running around, you're like,
yeah,
what timeline are we on? Which
yeah. So,
yeah,
and every year it was maybe something different that they noticed, but because my sample rate was once a year, I started to notice. So, like for instance, they would ask, um, when did young Christians start swearing? When did that become okay? And I
Mark
would jokingly
Driscoll,
say it was when Don Miller's book Blue Like Jazz came out.
yeah,
And then it was, when did y'all start drinking? We've been anti-alcohol for 100 years. When did you all now every young pastor I know drinks. What's going on with that? And then it was tattoos. And then it was being
oh
open and affirming.
yeah, you're a
And
slippery slope master right there, Bo.
so, I mean, if you think about just that swearing, drinking, tattoos, and being open and affirming, missionaries were coming back from the field going, what is happening around here?
Yeah.
And that was in a 10-year window trip.
Oh, and then Love Wins come out, and the moment the missionary
Oh,
finds out Gandhi's not going to hell, they're like,
listen, you're not overstating this. I had a falling out with a friend who said, if this is true, I've been fooled and I have wasted my entire life learning another language and telling people in this other culture that if they don't believe in Jesus, that they're going to hell. I have wasted my entire life. He literally said, like, you are mocking my entire life in ministry.
well, that was awkward. That would be an awkward conversation. You know, the I can.
No,
You're a lot nicer than me, Bo. I'm sure you handled it more gracefully than I would. I'd be like, never mind. I'm not even going to say what I'd say. I'm just editing myself. But um, No, I've known people that have that awakening, but it's usually like they're telling it to me after they've got to a different position, as opposed to encountering it and just being mad about it.
Hmm.
Now on the podcast and stuff, people would send me messages, and my favorite is when, they start by hate listening to the podcast, and they're like, "Listen to this heresy," then they get a little interested, and they're like, "I like Greg Boyd, but I can't go like Catherine
Mm.
Keller level process on this junk." And then, they get really into it and stuff, and then like, 7 years later, they're like an angry evangelical atheist that are like, "I can't believe, you don't see that you're just an ignoramus, Tripp." And I'm like, I just want to like reply to one of their first emails and be like, "You remember when
Well,
you told me N.T. Wright wasn't really within the bounds of orthodoxy?" Like,
I'm the opposite of the Apostle Paul. Remember when he would write and say, like, you don't want me to come over there in person, but I'm the opposite. In person, I am a gentle teddy bear. I'm
mhm.
kind and ironic and patient. But if somebody fires an email or a tweet or write a comment, man, I will escalate quickly. I will get red faced and go through the roof. But in person, I'm pretty good. So, like
Well,
when somebody will say something critical in person, I often find a kind response comes out of my heart to say, "Oh, if you think this is bad, you should know what I really believe. This is me." This is me trying to toe the company line.
yeah. One thing about the sample rate thing, I'd just say if people haven't checked out the podcast Bo is doing about his dad's legacy and such, that was something that was really cool in the episode where he was hanging out in the garage, right? Where we would ask certain questions, and he kind of framed them with like, one of the things when you train people that are a part of an intense mission organization and you have relationships with people in different cultures, like, you like really relativize identity markers that people confuse when they confuse their cultural identity with their Christian identity.
Wow.
And so like part of what he did was kind of like perform a kind of humility, but it's one because he knows he's get trusted enough to speak into different parts of the church within America and North America, right? But also internationally, and has these relationships where like you just answer differently when uh when vocationally you're at, if you're using the sample rate, have trusted relationships with people all over that are constantly coming in. um, and I think that's something similar you get when someone like Brian McLaren, who had trusted relationships all over the church,
Yeah.
intentionally built friendships with people in other continents and other religions. Like, there's like a
Yeah.
different disposition
Yeah.
when you allow others to speak into things. Um,
Yeah.
but okay, Bo,
Yep.
the last one was like apologetics after false consciousness. We don't have to get into it, just like no one is transparent as to why they believe things, so it just changes your disposition.
Yeah.
Um, but I had 3 other segments, and we're already an hour, and 15 minutes in. And
Yeah.
do you want to pick one of them? Like,
Yes, but I should let you know that I have a meeting in about 10 minutes.
oh, this is good. Then it forces us
Okay.
to be quick. All right, you have not seen these. We got sent in a question about, can you just tell me what theology is, since this is a theology nerd throwdown. Some of the other responses the person gave made me think we were going to give them answers and then they could judge us as not Christian. But I'm just taking it very seriously. So what I did is I pulled 3 definitions of theology from 3 different systematic theology texts,
You
but I
did?
didn't put the person's name on it, on the quotes. And so I'll read them, and then you're gonna just tell me what you think about each one. You get 1 minute to discuss it, and then
Oh,
we'll power rank them.
okay.
If you want to tell me which one you like best,
Okay. Yeah.
or if you have a guess as to who these are, right? You
Oh,
can
okay.
also do that. That's a bonus point. It's a bonus point.
Okay.
All right. So we'll
I'm
see how
grabbing
this
a I'm
works.
grabbing a notepad. Oh, wow, you
Oh
you
wait, hold
really
on.
did some preparation this week.
Really, really did some preparation. That's right.
All right.
It's very intense. Hold on, I got to turn off the monk over here, or
Yeah. Okay.
we won't be able to read it all, and then Jeez, that'd be it's like cheating. All right. Definition number 1. It is simple but true to say that theology has only one single problem: God. We are theologians for the sake of God. God is our dignity. God is our agony. God is our hope. For me, theology springs from a divine passion. That is the open wound of God in one's own life and the torment of men, women, and children of this world. But for me, theology also springs from God's love for life, the love for life which we experience in the presence of the life giving Spirit, and which enables us to move beyond our resignation and begin to love here and now. These are also Christ's two experiences of God. And because of that, they are the foundation of theology: God's delight and God's pain.
Oh, yikes.
Yeah, but what do you think?
Oh, that is. I'm gobsmacked with how deep that was. To account, so the person's doing something really interesting, which is to account for the multiplicity of human experience, the complexness, but within the divine life.
Yeah.
That is, so this person is like probably Lutheran, I'm guessing. um this is a kind of reflection that comes out of like a liberation um emphasis, persuasion.
Mm-hmm.
So this is a person whose community has known deep suffering, but also a faithfulness. I'm really, this is breathtaking in its complexity and its depth.
Yeah.
Wow.
All right, here we go. The second one. Most Christian theologians would rather begin with the assumption that we're trying to interpret an event in which God has become revealed. That event to which we're responding comes to us in compact form in the Bible. It comes wrapped in the language and symbols of those who experienced the revelation and then wrote about it. If the task of theology is not conceived as interpreting Scripture, if we conceive of theology as beginning with human experience and imagination independent from the interpretation of Scripture, in the immediacy and in service to my tradition, then we have no way of knowing whether or not we are speaking about the God of Israel who raised Jesus from the dead and fired the faith of the first Christians. Hence, I believe Christian theology must remain hermeneutical theology, that is, remain rooted in the task of interpreting the originary biblical symbols.
Whoa. Okay. This is an interesting angle that this person has taken. They're primarily have a hermeneutical concern,
Mm-hmm.
but I can tell that their uh, personal orientation is rooted in some type of a historic emphasis of Christianity, because this person clearly has read, right, contemporary, deconstructive,
Mm-hmm.
philosophical, hermeneutical stuff, but they have a Christian commitment where they still want to interpret the symbols. So I'm intrigued as to who this is. I also love the event language. I'm a big fan of event language,
Yeah, and you can
especially
tell
like
they're like, I'm very much not a fundamentalist in the sense of, right, it's
right.
the hermeneutical event, but it's the hermeneutical event of the God who's revealed in
Yeah.
Israel and Jesus, right? So there's like this dialectic going on of
Yeah.
you're interpreting, but you're not interpreting from nowhere
Yeah.
personally, and you're not interpreting, but you are interpreting from somewhere, right? The received tradition of
Yeah.
Israel in the early church.
So if I were to take a guess, that first one is like a Moltmann, James Cone, Catherine Keller, something.
Mhm.
This one comes from the Yale School. This is
Ooh.
somebody who's engaged Lindbeck or Fry. This is This is what are they calling themselves? What's
Post
the group?
liberals.
Yes, the post liberals. I'm thinking of a David Finch type, somebody
All right.
like that.
All right. Here's the last one.
All right.
So the whole of theology is a project of interpretation, a construal of the meaning of Christian faith in light of a particular set of cultural exigencies. Geez, I can't talk. And on the basis of particular reading of the text and traditions. Theology, as a practice of the Christian community, is a constructive activity that requires critical interpretations and practical appropriation of faith's language about God in the context of contemporary cultural challenges and their theological implications.
Did I write that? Tripp, is this me?
No.
It sounds like me because it concerns everything I'm concerned
I
about.
thought you'd like it.
The practice of A, practice. B, community. C, constructive. Theology is a constructive activity, right? I mean, it is a human form that as we participate in it, like the economy or state boundaries, as we participate in it, race, that it takes on concrete consequences. So it's constructive. That's number 3. Critical interpretation. That's the hermeneutical. Practical appropriations, language, context. I wrote my master thesis about contextual theology, contemporary, the cultural challenges, right? That's our public part of theology and its implications. I'm smitten.
Oh.
I love whoever this is.
All right. So if you're power ranking,
Number 1.
All right.
No. I think the first person, that number 1 about the two sides of the pain and
The pain and the joy.
and the beauty, yeah, that was probably that has to be number 1, I would think. This would go number 2 just because it touches literally every base as it rounds. I mean, this is fantastic. And I really do like the second one, but I personally don't resonate with either the concern or the loyalty sentiment that was driving it. I don't have the same motivation. I appreciate what they're doing. It's just that's not my particular emphasis, but I like what they're doing.
All right. Are you ready for the reveal here?
This is one of the best games. Probably because I didn't come up with it.
All right. Well, all right. Number 1, Jürgen Moltmann, you called it. Look at that. Look at that. That's a bonus point. That's a bonus point.
Emphasis on Bo.
And yeah. And I think you're right. Like this, like one of the reasons it's compelling is both like the act of theology is a constructive wrestling, right? Like it is you're being tasked with it, and the whole experience of the people of God is interpreted in and through the life of the triune God, and he kind of like weaves it there.
Yeah,
and you see that kind of like God's delight and God's pain, that theology of the cross and theology of hope dynamic, very moldy.
Whenever somebody puts so central the crucified God, right, the experience of Christ, in that, they've either read Moltmann or they've been influenced by somebody who has.
Yeah. All right, number 2, Ted Peters. Ted Peters.
Oh, that's interesting.
From God.
I did not recognize that.
I know. Well, I thought
Christian
about
symbol. Yes. Okay.
You see all the dots were because if I put in the chunk on prolepsis, then it's a dead giveaway. It's no, you would have been like Ted Peters, and
oh my goodness.
And then here's the last one. Peter Hodgson.
Really?
Yeah.
I'm writing this down.
And his 1-volume systematic theology is quite excellent.
A systematic theology?
Yeah, that's his definition at the beginning of the 1-volume. Peter Hodgson was longtime theology professor at Vanderbilt's Div School. One of the primary translators of Hegel into English, and he's got a whole commentary series on Hegel, philosophy of religion and such. But he was in charge for a while of the constructive theology working group, and
Yes.
he was on faculty at
Okay.
Vanderbilt the same time as Edward Farley, and they
Yep.
had such
Yep.
a good synergy. Like you can tell, like when he wrote his systematic, that he was like being
Yeah.
attentive to Ed Farley's kind of practical theology concerns. And so
Oh,
I've taught the book a few times. I always like it.
really?
Yeah.
Okay. I'm gonna get it. I think the only place that I have encountered his work is through Bonnie Miller McLemore,
Mhm,
who's sort of my practical theologian hero, and maybe Catherine Tanner
mhm.
in a constructive. I'm gonna go look because his name's not super familiar to me, and that quote lit me up. So I got to
Wow.
go investigate.
Well, there you go. There you go. And we also had a game on power ranking bad ideas about God.
That
Um, and
I
then
saw you send that, and I was like, "Well, this should be interesting."
and then I sent Bo an outline of the thing I was thinking about, and I was like, I don't think we'll get to this, but there it is. But if you look at it, then at some point I'm sure I'll bring it up because it was my notes to myself on my phone when I was flying back from Denver,
Hmm.
and uh, it's about the relationship of omnipotence and the desire in modernity to control things. And I thought of it because of the eclipse, right? That humans are like, oh, we're going to go watch the eclipse and sit around, and oh, this is so wild. And the rest of nature is like, WTF? Like, they're all like freaking out, and we've gotten to such a relationship to nature, that like any time. We don't see ourselves as controlling it, right? Like, oh, we got air conditioning, oh, we got alarm clocks, oh, we got all these kind of things. Like it, that the spectacle of an eclipse, as something like not to be fearful of, not the inbreaking of the uncontrollable. Like, how do we control it? Let's make a spectacle of it. And this whole like big thing on control, it's like all sitting there. I mean, it was quite an outline
Wow.
of the
No, you
ideas
were
I was going
flying
to
back
try out.
from Colorado. You were flying back from Colorado, right?
Yeah, and 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 me and the Jehovah Wana were sitting in the Holy Ghost touched me
I, that's what I thought. That's what I
in the
thought.
airplane ride, and no, I have a ongoing Google Doc where when I just like have ideas that I might use later, I just like put them in it. And this one just kept going. And I was
Wow.
like, I'm just going to tell Bo about it. Like, the outline even outlines all the maneuvers of modernity for moving towards control and stuff. And,
Whoa.
it was, uh, it
Well,
was fun, but
I'm glad Colorado was good to you.
we didn't get there. So it might show up next time. Who knows? Or I
Okay.
might decide it's not that good, but I was like, well, I'll try it out on Bo. But
Hey, everybody. I hope you've enjoyed this throwdown. Make sure to subscribe to the new stream.
oh yeah. And we'll tell you whenever it's the last one. They'll show up on Homebrewed too. But go ahead and go subscribe because we're gonna get new graphics. We'll probably have to ask everyone. Maybe next time what we'll do is we'll show them the two versions after they're all colored out and stuff.
Yeah.
Yeah. And be like, look at these cool cartoons. Um we should tell the artist though if you want to get that you want to get your summer weight face in. I was like, can we trim my beard back a little bit so it looks like I got a neck? Or just add like Tony always picks on me for wearing V-necks. I was like, well, a V-neck is the only way I can simulate having a neck. If I wear it all the way up,
Yeah.
it's just like go straight from beard, uh, straight from beard to head. And
Yeah.
look, Joshua Patterson, look,
I know.
this is all. Look, Bo's going to come to beer camp. This is the Holy Ghost has already arranged it. And uh, you know what Joshua did 2 years ago?
What?
Joshua runs a Rethinking Faith podcast.
Yeah. Yeah.
And 2 years ago at beer camp, he was working at Full Tip Brewing Company, and he
Oh,
made a beer called the Process Party. And their
wow.
beer designer, like can designer, made a uh, made a logo and everything where like me and Whitehead are talking to each other at a table, and then like he's over in the corner talking to Catherine Keller, Josh is, and then Phil and Diana are talking to each other, and like
Yeah.
at this brewery, in the things in the background are like the covers of Whitehead's books are like hanging in the at the brewery, and it was called
Interesting.
Process Party.
That's
um
beautiful.
yeah.
Hey, Tripp, as we used to say in my premillennial evangelical days, I'll see you here, there, or in the air.
Oh, yeah. All right. Ta-ta.